The red violation sticker on my Mustang was not just a warning, it was a declaration of war. Tell me where you're watching from, because what happens next still feels unreal even to me. That order gave me 30 days to destroy my dad's 1967 fastback. Not move it, not hide it, destroy it, or lose the house he built with his own hands. Gerald Hoffman, Meadowbrook's wannabe lawman, strutted onto my driveway with 2 HOA officers wearing uniforms you cannot buy anywhere legally. No badges, no jurisdiction, just arrogance. They thought the car was all my father left me. They had no clue he also left me the one thing capable of ending their entire empire. I had been back in my father's house for exactly 11 days when Gerald Hoffman decided to introduce himself. Not with a handshake, not with a welcome basket like normal neighbors bring. He came with a clipboard, 2 men in matching Navy uniforms, and a piece of red paper that would change everything. I was in the garage that Saturday morning, running a chamois cloth over the hood of the 1967 Mustang fastback. My father and I had spent 3 years rebuilding before he got sick. Cherry red, numbers matching, the last thing we ever made together. He passed 6 months ago and left me this car, this house, and a cardboard box of documents I still had not opened. I kept telling myself I would get to it when I was ready. I was not ready. The sound of footsteps on concrete made me look up. 3 men stood at the edge of my driveway, silhouetted against the morning sun. The one in front wore a polo shirt with the Meadowbrook Estates logo embroidered on the chest. Around 60, silver hair combed back with precision, the kind of tan you get from golf courses and country clubs. His smile did not reach his eyes. Behind him, the 2 uniformed men carried themselves like they had authority. But something was off. Their uniforms had patches that said HOA Compliance Division. Their belts held flashlights and radios. No badges, no guns, no actual legal standing whatsoever. I learned later that Gerald had created this security force himself, recruited retired guys who missed feeling important, dressed them up like cops, and let them patrol the neighborhood like it was their personal kingdom. But in that moment, all I saw were 3 strangers examining my father's car like it was evidence at a crime scene. Gerald stepped forward and extended his hand. I wiped the grease off my palm and shook it. His grip was firm, practiced, the handshake of a man who believed first impressions were power plays. He introduced himself as president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association and said he had been protecting this community for 12 years. He used the word protecting like it meant something sacred. Then his eyes drifted past me to the Mustang, and his expression curdled into something I can only describe as contempt. He asked how long I planned to keep that thing on the property. I told him it was not going anywhere. Gerald nodded slowly, like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis, and handed me the red paper from his clipboard. The document was titled Vehicle Compliance Violation Notice, but the word that stopped my breath was in bold letters halfway down the page: destruction. According to Section 12.7 of the CC&Rs, my vehicle failed to meet community aesthetic and safety standards. Vehicles classified as non-compliant hazards were subject to mandatory removal and disposal. The notice gave me 30 days to surrender the Mustang to a certified crusher. Refusal meant a lien on my property, daily fines of $500, and forced compliance proceedings. I read it twice because the words refused to make sense. I asked Gerald what gave him the authority to demand I destroy my own legally registered vehicle. He tilted his head like I had asked something beneath his intelligence. The CC&Rs gave him that authority. Every homeowner signed them. My father signed them 25 years ago, which meant I inherited the obligation along with the house. I told him the car was parked in my private garage. I told him it had passed California State Inspection 3 months ago. Gerald's smile tightened into a thin line. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. Not enough to be private, just enough to feel like a threat. He said he had been doing this for 12 years. He knew every loophole, every regulation, every judge in the county who handled HOA disputes. People who fought him ended up selling their homes at a loss just to escape the fines. He straightened his polo shirt and said, "I seem like a smart young man." Smart young men knew when to cooperate. Behind him, one officer was photographing my car from multiple angles. The other had begun documenting my garage dimensions, the oil stain on the concrete, the toolbox against the wall, Every detail becomes ammunition. Gerald turned to leave, then stopped at the edge of the driveway. He spoke to the officer beside him, but pitched his voice loud enough for me to hear every syllable. He said there was always one in every neighborhood, someone who thought the rules did not apply to them, someone who needed to learn that Meadowbrook had standards. He glanced back at me one final time. The crusher would be expecting my call. After they left, I stood in the garage holding that red paper, staring at the car my father believed could prove that broken things become beautiful again. On the workbench sat the cardboard box I had been avoiding since the funeral. He always said there was something important in there about this neighborhood, something they forgot. I did not open it that day. I should have. The next morning, I did what any reasonable person would do. I hired a lawyer. His name was Robert Castellano, a real estate attorney who had handled my father's estate, and when I showed him the destruction notice, his first reaction was to laugh. He said he had seen aggressive HOA boards before, but demanding the physical destruction of a legally registered vehicle was beyond anything in his experience. He spent 2 hours reviewing the Meadowbrook CC&Rs and found nothing that authorized what Gerald was demanding. Section 12.7 mentioned aesthetic standards and the removal of inoperable vehicles. But my Mustang was neither inoperable nor in violation of any specific guideline. Robert drafted a formal appeal letter citing California Vehicle Code, the state's protections for classic car owners, and the fundamental property rights that superseded any homeowners association covenant. He sent it certified mail to the HOA board that afternoon. I felt something close to relief for about 23 hours. Gerald's response arrived by email at 6:14 the following morning. The appeal had been reviewed and denied under the President's emergency authority on matters of community safety. The letter claimed my vehicle constituted a fire hazard due to its age and a potential environmental threat due to suspected fluid leaks. Both claims were fabricated. The car had passed emissions testing. The garage floor was clean enough to eat off. But Gerald did not need facts. He had authority. And in Meadowbrook Estates, authority was whatever Gerald Hoffman decided it was that day. Robert called me that afternoon and said we could challenge the denial in court, but HOA litigation was expensive and slow. Cases like this typically took 18 months to reach a hearing. Gerald knew that. He was counting on it. The fines would bankrupt me long before any judge heard my argument. That same week, the harassment began in earnest. The HOA patrol car, a white sedan with the Meadowbrook logo on the door, started passing my house 8 times a day. I counted. They would slow down in front of my driveway, sometimes stopping entirely, while one of the officers photographed whatever he could see from the street. On Tuesday, I received a violation notice for my grass being half an inch above the permitted height. On Wednesday, another notice arrived for my trash cans being visible from the road for more than 2 hours after collection. On Thursday, they cited me for a water stain on my driveway that they classified as a chemical spill. Each violation carried a $50 fine and a warning that repeated offenses would result in escalated penalties. None of these things had bothered anyone when my father lived here, but my father was gone, and I was learning that Gerald's system was not about rules. It was about pressure. Constant, accumulating, suffocating pressure designed to make you surrender before you even realized you were at war. I started documenting everything, installed 4 security cameras around the property, connected them to cloud storage so nothing could be lost or tampered with. I photographed my lawn with a ruler beside it. I time-stamped my trash can placement. I kept a log of every patrol car pass, every interaction, every piece of paper they left on my door. My background as a forensic accountant had taught me that evidence was everything. You could not fight a system with emotion. You needed records, patterns, proof, at night. I sat at my father's desk and researched California Civil Code sections on HOA overreach. I learned about the Davis-Sterling Act, about fiduciary duties, and about the legal limits of board authority. Gerald had been running Meadowbrook like a personal fiefdom for 12 years. I began to wonder if anyone had ever actually read the laws he claimed to enforce. The community email came on Friday evening. I was not on the mailing list, but a neighbor I had never spoken to forwarded it to me without comment. The subject line read, "Protecting our property values." The body of the email featured a photograph of my Mustang, taken from the street at an angle that made it look like it was parked on the lawn rather than inside my garage. Gerald's message described an unnamed resident who was refusing to comply with community standards. He wrote that this vehicle was an eyesore that threatened the aesthetic integrity and market value of every home in Meadowbrook. He urged all homeowners to stand united with their HOA against those who believed the rules did not apply to them. He did not use my name. He did not have to. Everyone would know by morning. I was being turned into the neighborhood villain, the outsider who threatened their property values, the problem that Gerald was heroically trying to solve. Saturday afternoon, I was checking my mailbox when an elderly woman approached from the house 3 doors down. I had seen her working in her garden a few times, but we had never spoken. She introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson and said she had known my father for over 20 years. She glanced around like she was checking for surveillance, which in this neighborhood was not paranoid. It was practical. Then she leaned closer and said something that made me forget about the mail entirely. She told me my father had fought Gerald, too, years ago. She said he had something on them, something about the land, but he never pushed it. He was too kind. She asked if he ever told me about it. I said no. She nodded like she expected that answer. She told me to look through his papers carefully and then walked back to her house without another word. That night, I stood in the garage staring at the cardboard box on the workbench. My father's handwriting on the side said, "Important documents." I still was not ready to open it, but I was running out of time. The next morning, a new notice appeared on my door. Final compliance deadline, 14 days. The vehicle must be surrendered to a certified crusher or face fines of $1,000 per day, an immediate property lien, and the initiation of forced sale proceedings. Gerald was not just trying to take my car anymore. He was trying to take my home. The same home my father had lived in for 25 years. The same home where we rebuilt that Mustang together. I looked at the box again. Whatever my father had been hiding, whatever weapon he never used, I needed to find it, because I was out of legal options, out of time, and Gerald Hoffman was just getting started. Day 13 began with a knock that sounded different from all the others. Not the aggressive pounding of the HOA patrol, not the passive-aggressive slip of paper under the door. This was formal, official, the kind of knock that comes with consequences. I opened the door to find Gerald Hoffman standing on my porch with a man I did not recognize. This man wore an actual uniform, a real badge, a county sheriff's deputy with a manila folder in his hand, and the tired expression of someone who had done this too many times before. Gerald's smile was the widest I had ever seen it. He looked like a man who had already won and was just here to collect his trophy. The deputy introduced himself and handed me the folder. Inside was a court order. Gerald had filed an emergency motion with the county court, claiming my vehicle presented an imminent safety hazard to the community. A judge had signed it without a full hearing. The order authorized immediate compliance enforcement. I called Robert Castellano while they waited on my porch. His voice sounded heavy when he explained the situation. Gerald had found a sympathetic judge, someone who rubber-stamped HOA emergency motions without scrutiny. It happened more often than people realized. We could appeal, but appeals took weeks. The court order was valid right now, today, this moment. Robert said he was sorry. He said the system was supposed to protect people like me. He said sometimes it failed. I hung up and looked at Gerald, who had been watching me through the screen door with the patience of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere left to run. He stepped forward and presented me with 2 options, speaking slowly like he wanted me to feel every word. Option 1 was to sign a consent form voluntarily surrendering my vehicle for destruction. I would pay a $5,000 compliance fee, and the matter would be closed. Option 2 was to refuse. If I refused, the HOA would place an immediate lien on my property, file a civil suit seeking $50,000 in damages and legal fees, and initiate foreclosure proceedings. Gerald said he had done this before. He said families with more resources than I had lost everything trying to fight him. He asked which option I preferred. I did not have $50,000. I did not have the 18 months it would take to fight through the court system. My father had left me the house free and clear, but the house meant nothing if I lost it to liens and legal fees before I ever saw a judge. I thought about what my father would want. He would want me to keep his home. He would want me to survive this. But he also poured 3 years of his life into that car. 3 years of weekends and late nights and teaching me how to rebuild a carburetor, how to gap spark plugs, how to sand primer until the surface was perfect. The car was not transportation. It was time. It was a memory. It was proof that broken things could become beautiful. And now I was being asked to destroy it with my own signature. Gerald held out a pen. The deputy looked at his watch. I took the pen. I signed the form. Gerald thanked me for my cooperation and said the towing service would arrive within the hour. They let me follow in my own car. A small mercy. Or maybe Gerald just wanted me to watch. The certified crusher was a junkyard 40 minutes outside the city. A sprawling graveyard of metal and rust surrounded by chain-link fencing. The Mustang looked obscene among the wrecks, its cherry red paint gleaming in the afternoon sun like a heart still beating in a morgue. I asked the operator if there was any other option. A sale, a donation, anything. He shook his head and pointed at the paperwork. Destruction was specified. The vehicle had to be processed and documented for HOA records. He told me I could wait in the office if I did not want to watch. I stayed. I owed my father that much. The crusher was a massive hydraulic machine with jaws that could flatten a sedan in under 2 minutes. They positioned the Mustang on the platform. The operator gave me one last glance, something like pity in his eyes, then activated the machine. The sound was worse than I imagined, metal screaming as it folded, glass exploding outward, the roof collapsed into the dashboard, the perfect red paint crumpling like paper. It took 90 seconds to turn 3 years of work into a cube of scrap, no bigger than a washing machine. I stood there long after it was done. Gerald had already left. He got what he wanted. I drove home in silence. No radio, no thoughts, just a hollow ringing in my ears that might have been shock or might have been something else entirely. When I pulled into the driveway, the garage door was still open. The space where the Mustang had been was empty now, just oil stains on concrete and the ghost of something that used to matter. I walked inside and went straight to the workbench. The cardboard box sat there, patient, waiting, my father's handwriting on the side, important documents. I had been avoiding it for 6 months. I could not avoid it anymore. I opened the box. Inside were folders, envelopes, old photographs, and tax returns going back decades. And at the bottom, a large envelope with my name on it in my father's handwriting. I opened it and pulled out 3 items: a property deed, an original lease agreement dated 1999, and a handwritten note on yellow legal paper. The note said, "Son, if they ever cross the line, you will know what to do. This land remembers who owns it. They just forgot." I read the deed twice. Then I read it again. Chen Family Holdings. The trust my father established decades ago. It owned 2.3 acres of land in Meadowbrook Estates, land that included the HOA clubhouse, the community pool, the parking lot where Gerald held his monthly board meetings. The HOA did not own its headquarters. They rented it, from my father, from me. The lease was 25 years old and set to expire in 6 months. I sat down at my father's desk and spread the documents in front of me. Gerald Hoffman had just crushed my father's legacy. He had no idea my father left me the power to crush his. I spent the next 72 hours doing what I do for a living, investigating, analyzing, building a case for 8 years. I have worked as a forensic accountant at one of the largest firms in California. My job is finding what people try to hide: embezzlement, fraud. Financial crimes are buried under layers of paperwork and misdirection. I have testified in federal court. I have helped send executives to prison. And now I was applying every skill I had ever learned to a homeowners association in suburban California. The lease agreement my father left me was the first piece. 25 pages of legal language, most of it standard boilerplate, but 3 clauses stood out like neon signs. Clause 7 established the rental rate at $800 per month, unchanged since 1999. A quick search of commercial land values in the area told me the current market rate for comparable property was over $8,000. Gerald had been paying pennies for prime real estate. Clause 12 allowed the landlord to adjust the rent with 90 days written notice upon lease renewal. The lease expired in 6 months. And Clause 14, the one that made me smile for the first time in 2 weeks, stated that any structural modifications to buildings on the leased property required prior written approval from the landlord. I drove past the HOA clubhouse the next morning. The building had been renovated recently. That much was obvious. new windows, expanded patio, a second-story addition that looked about 3 years old. I stopped at the county planning office and pulled the permit records. The renovation was completed 37 months ago for $200,000. Contractor payments, architectural fees, material costs, all documented. What was not documented anywhere in my father's files was a written approval from Chen Family Holdings authorizing the work. Gerald had modified the property that he did not own without the landlord's consent. Under Clause 14, that was a material breach of the lease agreement. I now had leverage, but I wanted more than leverage. I wanted to understand exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. So, I did what forensic accountants do. I followed the money. California Civil Code Section 5500 requires homeowners associations to make their financial records available to members upon request. I submitted the request on Monday. By Wednesday, I had 5 years of HOA financial statements, budget reports, and assessment records. The pattern emerged within hours. Every year, the HOA collected a special assessment from homeowners, $200 per household, designated for clubhouse maintenance and community improvements. 312 households meant $62,400 annually, over 5 years. That totaled $312,000 in special assessments alone, separate from regular dues. The problem was that the actual maintenance expenses documented in the financial statements added up to roughly $130,000 for the same period. That left $182,000 unaccounted for. The money had been collected, the money had been spent, but the records did not show where it went. I cross-referenced the expense categories with vendor invoices where available. Several payments went to companies I could not find in any business registry, shell companies, possibly, or companies that existed only on paper. Every one of those payments had a single signature authorizing the disbursement. Gerald Hoffman. I needed legal help, not Robert Castellano, who specialized in estates and residential transactions. I needed someone who understood property law, landlord rights, and HOA governance. A colleague at my firm recommended Lisa Yamamoto, a real estate attorney with a reputation for taking cases others considered too complicated. I met her at her office downtown and spread my evidence across her conference table: the property deed, the lease agreement, the county permit records, the financial analysis. She reviewed everything in silence for nearly an hour, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When she finally looked up, her expression was difficult to read. She said I did not just have leverage, I had the foundation for multiple legal actions. The unauthorized renovation was a clear lease violation. The financial discrepancies suggested potential embezzlement, which was a criminal matter. The pattern of special assessments without proper accounting violated fiduciary duties under California law. She asked what I wanted to accomplish. I told her I wanted justice. I wanted Gerald to face consequences. I wanted to make sure he never did this to anyone else. Lisa nodded and explained the strategy she recommended. We would start with the lease, notify the full HOA board, not just Gerald, that Chen Family Holdings was the landlord and that serious compliance issues needed to be addressed. This would create fractures. Board members who did not know about the lease, who did not know about the unauthorized renovation, would start asking questions. Gerald's control depended on information asymmetry. Once other people knew what we knew, his position would weaken. The financial issues we would handle separately, building a documented case before referring it to the district attorney if the evidence supported criminal charges. She warned me this would take time. Gerald would not surrender easily. Men like him never did, but we had something he did not expect. We had the land beneath his feet. I signed the retainer agreement that afternoon. Gerald thought he had won when he crushed my father's car. He had no idea he had just awakened something far more dangerous than a grieving son. He had awakened an auditor with nothing left to lose. The letter went out on a Thursday morning. Lisa sent it certified mail to every member of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board, not just Gerald, 5 people in total. The letter was 3 pages of precise legal language that could be summarized in one sentence. Chen Family Holdings, the trust established by my father, David Thompson, was the legal owner of the land on which the HOA clubhouse, community pool, and administrative parking lot sat. The letter requested an emergency meeting to discuss lease renewal terms and what it described as serious compliance violations requiring immediate attention. Lisa included copies of the property deed, the original lease agreement, and the county assessor records confirming ownership. She gave them 72 hours to respond. Gerald called me 14 hours later. It was 11:40 at night. I let it ring 4 times before answering. His voice sounded different than before. The smooth confidence was still there, but underneath it I could hear something new, uncertainty. He asked what game I was playing. He said my father never mentioned anything about owning land. He said this had to be some kind of scam. I told him to check the county records. I told him to check his lease. I told him to check his calendar, because 90 days were coming fast. Then I hung up. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 in the evening. Lisa and I arrived 15 minutes early and took seats at the front of the small conference room inside the clubhouse. The same clubhouse was built on land my family owned. The irony was not lost on me. Gerald sat at the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other members. I recognized Alice Cook from the community newsletter, where she was listed as treasurer. The others I had never seen before. Gerald's expression was composed, almost bored, like this was a minor inconvenience he would handle in minutes. The other board members looked confused. Lisa had brought a projector and connected it to her laptop. She asked permission to present, and one of the board members, a man named Richardson, nodded before Gerald could object. Lisa began with the property deed. She showed the county records, the chain of title going back to 1999 when my father purchased the land through Chen Family Holdings during a bankruptcy auction. She showed the original lease agreement signed by Gerald's predecessor and my father, 25 years at $800 per month. A gentleman's agreement. Essentially, my father could have charged 10 times that amount and still been below market rate. He never did. The board members' faces changed as Lisa spoke. Richardson leaned forward in his chair. Alice Cook was taking notes furiously. A woman named Delgado kept glancing at Gerald with an expression I could not quite read. Only Gerald remained still, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the projection screen like he could make it disappear through sheer will. Lisa moved to the second part of her presentation, the unauthorized renovation. She showed the county permit records, the construction costs, the timeline. She showed Clause 14 of the lease agreement, which required written landlord approval for any structural modifications. She asked if anyone on the board had documentation of such approval. Silence. Alice Cook spoke first. She asked Gerald directly if he had obtained permission from the landlord before renovating the clubhouse. Gerald said the landlord had been unreachable. He said the renovation was necessary for community safety. He said the board had voted to proceed. Lisa asked if there was documentation of that vote. Gerald said the records were in storage. Lisa said we would be requesting those records formally. Alice Cook wrote something on her notepad and underlined it twice. I spoke for the first time. I kept my voice calm, factual, the same tone I used when presenting evidence in depositions. I told them I had not come to destroy their community. I told them my father loved Meadowbrook, which was why he had kept the rent low for 25 years, why he never exercised his rights as landlord, why he let them build and expand without interference. But my father was gone now, and the current leadership had demonstrated a pattern of behavior that could not be ignored. I described the destruction order. I described the harassment campaign. I described standing in a junkyard, watching the car my father and I built together get crushed into scrap metal. I described the legal threats, the fabricated violations, the systematic pressure designed to force me out of my own home. Alice Cook stopped writing. Richardson was staring at Gerald. The room had become very quiet. Lisa presented our demands: a formal public apology for the destruction of my vehicle and the harassment campaign, financial compensation of $45,000, the appraised value of the Mustang. An independent audit of HOA finances was conducted by a certified public accounting firm, and Gerald Hoffman's immediate resignation from the board. Gerald laughed. It was not a convincing laugh. He said these demands were absurd. He said the board stood united. He said I was an outsider trying to extort a community I had no right to be part of. Lisa let him finish. Then she explained the alternative. If our demands were not met within 30 days, Chen Family Holdings would exercise its rights under the lease agreement. Rent would be adjusted to current market rates upon renewal, an increase from $800 to to approximately $8,000 per month. Additionally, we would pursue lease termination proceedings based on the unauthorized renovation, which would require the HOA to vacate the premises within 90 days. And finally, the financial discrepancies we had identified, $182,000 in unaccounted special assessment funds, would be referred to the district attorney's office for investigation into potential embezzlement. Gerald's face went pale. Alice Cook raised her hand and requested an executive session, board members only, to discuss the matter privately. It was the first time in 12 years anyone had requested a meeting without Gerald controlling the agenda. Richardson seconded the motion. The vote was 4-1. Lisa and I waited in the parking lot for 45 minutes. When Alice Cook finally emerged, she walked directly to us. She said the board was divided. She said Gerald was insisting this was a bluff, that we had no real power, but she had seen the documents. She had done the math on the finances. She said there would be another meeting soon, a larger one. She thanked us for bringing this to their attention. As she walked away, Lisa turned to me and said exactly what I was thinking. Gerald was not going to comply. Men like him never did. But now 4 other people knew the truth. And in a community built on secrets, truth was the most dangerous weapon of all. Alice Cook called me 3 days after the board meeting. She used a personal cell phone, not the HOA office line, and asked me to meet her at a coffee shop 2 towns over, where no one from Meadowbrook would see us. I recognized paranoia when I saw it. I had felt the same way for weeks. She arrived wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky and took the seat facing the door. Before I could say anything, she slid a folder across the table. She said she had been treasurer for 4 years. But Gerald controlled all the actual financial decisions. He approved expenses. He signed checks. He managed vendor relationships. Her role was mostly ceremonial, rubber stamping whatever he put in front of her. After our presentation, she went back through 5 years of records with fresh eyes. What she found made her sick. The folder contained her analysis. $183,000 in payments to companies that did not appear in any business registry she could find. Exposed Services LLC, Meadowbrook Maintenance Solutions, Premier Community Partners, names designed to sound legitimate, bank accounts that received money and then went dormant. Every single payment was authorized by Gerald's signature alone. I asked her why she was showing me this. She said Gerald had called an emergency board meeting the night after we left. He told the other members that I was running a scam, that the property documents were forged, and that I was working with lawyers to extort the community. He said the board needed to present a united front. He said anyone who broke ranks would be removed. Richardson and Delgado went along with it. They were afraid of him. But Alice could not stop thinking about the numbers. She said she had a fiduciary duty to the homeowners, not to Gerald Hoffman. She wanted to do the right thing, but did not know how. Without destroying herself in the process, I told her about California Civil Code Section 5500. Any homeowner could request an independent audit if they gathered enough signatures. Gerald could not block it without violating state law. Alice said she could get the signatures. She knew at least 20 people who had complained about assessments over the years, people who asked questions and got stonewalled. I told her to be careful. Gerald was not going to surrender quietly. The counterattack came 48 hours later. I was not on the community email list, but by now 6 neighbors were forwarding me everything Gerald sent. The subject line read Urgent Community Alert. The message was 4 paragraphs of carefully crafted manipulation. It described a predatory landlord who had fabricated ownership claims to extort the HOA. It said this individual wanted to evict our community center and sell the land to commercial developers. It said he had already demonstrated his disregard for our standards by refusing to comply with vehicle regulations, forcing the board to take action against an environmental hazard he refused to address. It urged all homeowners to stand united against this threat to their property values and way of life. Gerald did not use my name. He did not have to. The email included the same photograph of my Mustang he had used before, this time with a caption that read, "The beginning of the attack on our community." He was painting me as the villain. He was betting that fear would outweigh truth. It backfired faster than he expected. The phrase predatory landlord raised questions Gerald had not anticipated. Homeowners started asking on neighborhood message boards why the HOA had a landlord at all. They had assumed the community owned the clubhouse and pool. The confusion spread. People pulled out their closing documents and found no mention of land ownership. They started researching county records on their own. Within 3 days, the narrative had shifted from defending Gerald to demanding answers. Mrs. Patterson saw the opportunity and acted. She invited neighbors to her home for what she called a community conversation. 41 people showed up. They filled her living room, her dining room, and her back patio. She stood in front of them and told the story of my father. David Thompson had purchased the land 25 years ago when the original developer went bankrupt and the community faced dissolution. He had leased it back to the HOA for almost nothing because he believed in the neighborhood. How he had never raised the rent, never exercised his rights, never asked for recognition, and how Gerald Hoffman had repaid that generosity by forcing his son to watch his father's legacy get crushed in a junkyard. The room went silent when she finished. Then the questions started. People wanted to know about the finances. They wanted to know about the special assessments they had been paying for years. They wanted to know why they were never told the HOA did not own its own facilities. Mrs. Patterson did not have all the answers, but she had something better. She had Alice Cook's analysis. She passed copies around the room. By the end of the night, 23 homeowners had signed a formal petition demanding an independent financial audit under California Civil Code Section 5500. Gerald could not legally refuse. The petition also called for an emergency community meeting to address leadership concerns, a recall vote, something that had never happened in the 12 years of Gerald's reign. I received the security footage analysis from Lisa the next morning. Her team had reviewed every hour of recording from my cameras since the harassment began. Most of it was just patrol cars driving past, but 3 incidents stood out. The first showed one of Gerald's compliance officers approaching my mailbox at 2 a.m. and scratching something into the metal with a key. The second captured the same officer photographing the interior of my garage through a window. The third was audio. The officer's radio was close enough to pick up a transmission from Gerald himself. The words were distorted but clear enough for transcription. Make his life hell until he sells. Lisa said it was not enough for criminal charges on its own, but combined with everything else, it painted a picture of systematic harassment directed from the top. Gerald called me that night. It was past midnight. His voice had lost all pretense of authority. He sounded tired, desperate. He asked what I really wanted. He said he could write me a check for $100,000, and this would all go away. No lawyers, no audits, no public meetings, just a quiet resolution between reasonable men. I let the silence stretch for 10 seconds before I answered. I told him he had crushed something that no amount of money could replace. I told him I did not want his bribe. I wanted him to face the community he claimed to protect and explain where their money went. I wanted him to stand in front of his neighbors and answer for what he did. Then I told him I would see him on Saturday at the emergency meeting. The line went dead. The next morning, the official notification went out to all homeowners. Emergency HOA meeting. Saturday at 2 p.m. Mandatory attendance is requested for all board members. Agenda items included presentation of independent audit findings, discussion of leadership concerns, and a community vote on board confidence. Gerald Hoffman had 12 years of unchallenged brewer. He had 72 hours left. The clubhouse had never held this many people. Folding chairs lined every wall. Residents stood 3 deep along the back. Someone had propped open the side doors to accommodate the overflow onto the patio. I counted over 200 faces when I walked in, and more were still arriving. The irony of holding this meeting on land my family owned was not lost on anyone. Lisa had suggested we request a venue change, but I declined. Let them see where they were standing. Let them understand what Gerald had kept from them for 12 years. I took a seat in the front row with Lisa beside me. Across the aisle, a woman with a press badge was setting up a small camera. Someone had tipped off the local news. Gerald sat at the board table looking diminished somehow, like he had lost weight overnight. His lawyer sat next to him, a man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone like he wished he were anywhere else. The other board members were arranged along the table in a row that suddenly looked less like leadership and more like a firing squad waiting for the bullets to arrive. Alice Cook called the meeting to order at exactly 2 o'clock. Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling slightly as she held the agenda. She explained that the meeting had been called in response to a formal petition signed by 63 homeowners, representing more than 20% of the community. Under California Civil Code and the HOA bylaws, this triggered mandatory proceedings, including the presentation of audit findings and a vote of confidence in current leadership. She introduced the independent auditor, a CPA named Margaret Chen from a firm with no connection to anyone in Meadowbrook. Margaret stood and connected her laptop to the projector. The room went quiet. She began with the methodology. 5 years of financial records reviewed. Bank statements are cross-referenced with expense reports. Vendor payments verified against business registries and tax filings. Her tone was clinical, detached, the voice of someone presenting facts without emotion. The facts were damaging enough on their own. Total special assessments collected over 5 years came to $314,000. Documented expenses for the stated purposes totaled $131,000. The remaining $183,000 had been dispersed to vendors that could not be verified as legitimate businesses. Several appeared to share addresses with residential properties. One shared a bank account with a company registered to a family member of a current board officer. She did not name Gerald directly. She did not have to. Gerald's lawyer stood and objected. He called the audit preliminary and disputed its methodology. He demanded to know who had authorized this investigation. Alice Cook responded that California law authorized it. 63 homeowners authorized it. The lawyer started to argue further, but a voice from the back of the room cut him off. A man I did not recognize shouted that he wanted to know where his money went. Another voice joined in, then another. The lawyer sat down. Margaret Chen continued. She concluded by stating that the financial patterns she identified were consistent with what forensic accountants would classify as indicators of potential misappropriation. She recommended that the full audit findings be referred to the district attorney's office for further investigation. The room erupted. Gerald slammed his hand on the table and demanded order. No one listened. Lisa stood and asked permission to present additional evidence. Alice granted it over Gerald's objection. Lisa began with the property ownership documents, explaining how my father had purchased the land 25 years ago and leased it to the HOA at far below market rates. She showed the lease agreement, the rent escalation clause, and the provision requiring landlord approval for structural modifications. She showed the county records proving the clubhouse renovation had been completed without that approval. She showed the market analysis indicating the HOA had been paying $800 per month for property worth more than $8,000. Murmurs spread through the crowd. People turned to look at Gerald. His face had gone gray. Then Lisa played the security footage. The screen showed one of Gerald's compliance officers approaching my mailbox in the darkness. It showed the same officer photographing through my windows. And then the audio. Gerald's voice, distorted but unmistakable, was giving instructions through a radio. Make his life hell until he sells. The room went silent. Gerald stood and pointed at the screen. He called it fabricated. He called it a deep fake. He called it part of a coordinated attack by an outsider who wanted to destroy the community. His lawyer put a hand on his arm and whispered something. Gerald shook him off. Mrs. Patterson rose from her seat near the middle of the room. She was 81 years old and had lived in Meadowbrook longer than anyone. When she spoke, people listened. She told them about my father, how he had saved this community when the original developer went bankrupt, how he had purchased the land to prevent it from being sold to commercial interests. He had charged almost nothing for rent because he believed in neighbors taking care of each other, how he had spent the last years of his life restoring a car with his son, passing down skills and memories and love through the work of their hands, and how Gerald Hoffman had forced that son to watch everything his father built get crushed into scrap metal. Her voice broke on the last sentence. Someone in the back started crying. I stood. The room turned to face me. I had prepared remarks, but I set them aside. I spoke from somewhere deeper. I told them I could not get my father's car back. It was gone. 90 seconds in a crusher had turned 3 years of weekends, 3 years of conversations, 3 years of my father teaching me that broken things could become beautiful, into a cube of scrap metal. I told them Gerald did not just destroy a car. He destroyed Saturday mornings in the garage. He destroyed my father's voice explaining how to time an engine. He destroyed the last thing we ever made together. I told them I did not come to this meeting for revenge. I came because my father loved this community. He deserved better than what it had become under Gerald Hoffman. They all did. Gerald stood up. His chair fell backward. His face was red, his voice cracking. He shouted that they all needed him. He shouted that this place was nothing before he took over. He shouted that he made Meadowbrook what it was, that he decided who belonged here, that without him, there would be chaos. The mask had finally slipped. Everyone saw what was underneath. Alice Cook called for the vote. The motion was to remove Gerald Hoffman from the board, effective immediately. She asked for a show of hands in favor. The room became a forest of raised arms, 94%. The motion to refer all financial findings to the district attorney passed unanimously. The motion for a formal public apology to my family passed unanimously. Gerald stood alone at the board table. His lawyer was already packing his briefcase. The other board members had physically moved away from him. I watched him walk toward the exit. No one spoke to him. No one followed. 12 years of power ended in silence. When he reached the door, he turned back one last time and looked directly at me. I expected anger. I expected threats. Instead, I saw something I had not anticipated. Fear. The door closed behind him. Lisa asked what I wanted to do about the lease. I told her to renew it at the current rate. I told her my father would have wanted this community to have a second chance. I was not Gerald Hoffman. I did not destroy things just because I could. 4 months passed. Spring arrived in Meadowbrook with cherry blossoms lining the streets and children playing in yards that no longer felt like surveillance zones. The changes came gradually at first, then all at once, like a fever breaking. Gerald Hoffman was arrested on a Tuesday morning in March. The district attorney charged him with embezzlement, grand theft, and 3 counts of breach of fiduciary duty. The investigation had uncovered exactly what Margaret Chen's audit suggested. Shell companies funneling HOA funds into accounts controlled by Gerald and his brother-in-law, fraudulent invoices for work never performed, a pattern of financial manipulation spanning nearly a decade. His bail was set at $150,000. His photograph appeared on the front page of the local paper under a headline that read, HOA President Charged in Embezzlement Scheme. The man who had crushed my father's car in the name of community standards now faced 3 to 7 years in state prison. The civil consequences followed the criminal ones. The new HOA board, led by Alice Cook, filed suit against Gerald for recovery of misappropriated funds. His assets were frozen pending litigation. The bank where he had worked as a regional manager for 18 years terminated his employment the day after his arrest. Corporate liability concerns, they said. His wife filed for divorce before the month was out. His adult children released a statement through a lawyer distancing themselves from his actions and asking for privacy. I did not celebrate any of this. There was no satisfaction in watching a man's life collapse, even a man who had done what Gerald did to me. But there was something like justice, something like balance restored. The system he had manipulated for so long had finally turned its machinery against him. Meadowbrook itself transformed in ways I had not expected. Alice Cook ran for president unopposed and immediately began reforming the organization from the inside. New bylaws required dual signatures on all expenditures over $500. Term limits prevented anyone from holding office for more than 4 consecutive years. Annual independent audits became mandatory, with results published to all homeowners. The HOA patrol program was dissolved entirely. Compliance issues would now be handled through neighborly conversation and mediation, not pseudo-police intimidation. The CC&Rs were revised to remove provisions that had enabled Gerald's abuse, including the authority to demand destruction of personal property. Section 12.7 no longer existed. I renewed the lease at the original rate, $800 per month, unchanged from 1999. Lisa thought I was leaving money on the table. She calculated I could have justified $8,000 or more based on current market conditions. But my father had set that rate for a reason. He believed in this community. He believed that neighbors should help each other, not exploit each other. I was not going to dishonor his memory by becoming the predatory landlord Gerald had accused me of being. The memorial was Alice Cook's idea. She proposed it at the first board meeting under new leadership, and the vote was unanimous. A small garden near the clubhouse entrance, maybe a 1/4 acre, with benches and native plants and a stone marker at the center. They called it the David Thompson Memorial Garden. The dedication ceremony happened on a Saturday afternoon in early April. More than 100 residents attended. Mrs. Patterson spoke about my father's kindness, his quiet generosity, the way he had saved this community without ever asking for recognition. Alice Cook spoke about accountability and second chances. I was asked to say a few words, but found I could not speak much. I stood in front of the stone marker and read the inscription they had chosen, in memory of David Thompson, who believed that broken places could become beautiful again and gave us the chance to prove it. I placed a small framed photograph beside the stone, the Mustang, cherry red, gleaming in the California sun. The last picture I had taken before Gerald's men came. My father was not in the photo, but he was everywhere in it. Every bolt, every wire, every inch of chrome we had polished together. I still live in his house. The garage is empty now, just oil stains on the concrete where the Mustang used to sit. Sometimes I stand there in the evenings and remember the sound of his voice, explaining how to adjust a carburetor, how to listen to an engine, how to be patient with things that needed time to heal. I kept his note in a frame on my desk. Son, if they ever cross the line, you will know what to do. This land remembers who owns it, but I added something beneath it in my own handwriting, and now it remembers who you were. Mrs. Patterson visited last week. She brought cookies and stayed for coffee, and told me my father would be proud. Not because I won, she said, because of how I won. I think she was right. Gerald Hoffman believed that power meant the ability to destroy. He crushed my father's car because he could. He threatened my home because he could. He manipulated an entire community because no one had ever stopped him. But destruction is not strength. Any fool can break things. The real test is whether you can build something better from the wreckage. I looked out the window at the street where I grew up. Kids were riding bikes past the memorial garden. Neighbors were talking over fences instead of avoiding eye contact. The community my father believed in was finally becoming real. Some things you can destroy, some things you cannot. Gerald Hoffman never understood the difference. My father did. And now, so do I. Gerald thought power meant crushing what others loved. He was wrong. If this story reminded you that knowledge and patience can defeat any bully in a polo shirt, hit subscribe. More stories of HOA tyrants meeting justice are coming, because the land always remembers who really owns it.